Good evening, everyone. It's about 6:35. My name is Laura Leonard. I am the Public Information Officer for the Division of Waste Management in the Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you for coming out tonight. We're going to be talking about the Davidson Asbestos or Davidson Depot Brownfield property tonight. So if you could, we'll get started in just a minute. Please mute yourself. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We will be going through those and having a time for Q&A later on. If you have questions, or I'm sorry, if you have audio or connection issues, please leave the event and rejoin. That usually works about 95% of the time. And this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the DEQ website afterward. Give us a couple of days along with the presentation. So I will kick it over to Carolyn Minnick, who is the project manager for the Davidson Asbestos site, who will be doing our presentation tonight. We're here, as I said earlier, to talk about the redevelopment of the Davidson Depot site in Davidson. If you have questions, again, please put them in the chat box and we will address them after Carolyn gets done with her presentation. There you go. All right, Carolyn, all yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Laura. I wish we could be meeting in person. It's certainly more fun to see the public than talking to a camera, but I'm going to do the best I can. Thank you for all of the panelists who are coming and joining us, and appreciate as we get used to virtual meetings. For some reason that muted me. Okay, I'm going to go this direction. All right. As Laura mentioned, we are talking about the 301 Depot Street. For those of you who are new to the area, or maybe you just need a refresher on what is the Brownfield property. It is 301 Depot Street, the Metrolina warehouse. It was first developed in the late 1800s, was used as a cotton mill, and through the 1940s and 50s had some additional buildings. Some former operations there were the Linden Manufacturing, Davidson Cotton Mill, and Carolina Asbestos Corporation. Well, I'm involved here today because of the former uses by the Carolina Asbestos Corporation. They generated some asbestos waste during their manufacturing facilities from the 30s to the 60s. You'll see in the aerial picture on the right side, there was railroad tracks. They used to get the raw materials in via railroad and then through the manufacturing process in the facility. They made roofing shingles, they had textiles, floors, anything that needed fire retardant with the asbestos material in it. And they sold that, and then some of their waste they disposed of on the property, and that would be that green area at the end. This was the former holding pond, and then they ended up burying debris in it. All right, this site has a rich, long history, but I haven't been involved until 2015, so that's where I'm going to pick up the timeline. In the summer of 2015, the Brownfield program got an application in which a prospective developer was interested in entering this site into our program, and the project was soon deemed eligible. In the fall of 2016, we had a public information meeting. At this meeting, citizens expressed great concerns over redevelopment and the exposure of asbestos in the area. After that meeting, we had discovered that the existing cap had been breached in areas, and some of the asbestos material was on the neighboring streets. So the property owner did an immediate removal action to protect the community and to stabilize any other future exposures. In the winter of 2017, they ended up repairing the property slope and stabilize it, and a new cap was put on. This is all on the Brownfields property. And then from 2017 to present, we've been doing, and the property owner has been doing inspections on it. We've been keeping the community up to date with the prospective developer. So that's just my short timeline of events along the way. Well, those of you who've been with us from 2015 know that we've had these two terms, the donut and the donut hole. I'm just going to talk briefly on what the donut hole was. This is what Angela Miller's been involved with the EPA and her group, and they've been working in the local community. We're not talking about that this evening. We're focusing on the center of the donut, This is 301 Depot Street. DEQ has always been the lead agency on how we were going to be protective of human health and the environment for the property there. So tonight I have great news. I'm going to tell you how we're moving forward on the center of it. So in 2017, I mentioned the property owner put in a new cap along the way. We had to remove some vegetation and brush and put in a temporary cap that's been doing well along the way. We've been inspecting it. We also had to relocate some local varmin that were there and putting holes in. So this is what we're working with right now, but we need a long-term solution, and that's what I want to tell you about. How are we doing that at DEQ? We're going to use it through the Brownfields program. What is a Brownfields agreement? It is a legal agreement between federal state agencies recognized that the current owner and future owners follow an agreement. And what is that agreement? It's going to define the land use that's allowed at the property, and we're going to go through the land use restrictions and what the footprint is. I know we've had other meetings before that talk about more in the details of Brownfield's process. I'm just going to give you a high-level review. The state of North Carolina has over 600 recorded agreements. All of them have these components. A notice of Brownfield's property is Exhibit A, which is legal, what they can do, how they can do it, where it is, a site location map, because we got to know where we're talking about, a list of the contaminants that are on the property, a plat map so they can show you the picture, and then if you can't see it on a picture, you're going to look for it in legal description. These are standard in all of them, and at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you where you can read the exact one for our property, 301 Depot Street. This is an example of the first page, the notice of Brownfield's property. It's roughly 45 pages. And on the other side of the slide is our figure of what a plat map looks like. The most important part of an agreement, in my opinion, is the land use restrictions. So I'm going to go through those, yes, one by one, to tell you what they mean. Now, someone's going to want to dive into that and read everything, but on this presentation, I'm not going to go through the gray language. I just want you to know, what does it mean to you, and how is DEQ making it protective for human health and the environment? The most important restrictions in agreement are the first one and the last one. The first one outlines what you can use the property for. On this particular site, we've approved for non-residential uses. The gray goes into the detail of all of what they are. Just because a Brownfields agreement says that it's an approved use doesn't mean the town of Davidson has given local zoning approval. So just because it's allowed on here, you don't have to be worried. The town of Davidson still has a final say on what's allowed on that property. Land use restriction B says you cannot use the property for childcare, adult care, or school without DEQ approval. I have to warn you, there are 18 land use restrictions, so I will try to make it fun and exciting, but sometimes legal documents are not fun and exciting. Land use restriction number C is talking about if you're doing renovations, make sure the different agencies know what's going on and you're contacting them. Brownfields is technically everything from the ground under, but in your building, when you're renovating, we want to make sure you're talking to the appropriate agencies. Land use restriction D talks about groundwater. It is a standard land use restriction that we would not allow groundwater use on a Brownfields property. Charlotte Water supplies into your area. I don't believe anyone is drinking well water in their area or irrigation, so typically this is a standard land use restriction that everyone will accept. All right, one of the most important restrictions on this property is number E. It's talking about the Asbestos Design Plan, our first acronym, the ADP. The Asbestos Design Plan is for the developer, the contractors, future owners and tenants to know, how are you going to develop this safely? What are we doing in order to allow it's protected for human health and the environment? The long-term maintenance of the cap. What will the cap be? How are we going to handle it? When are we sampling for it? What's in the community? So the Asbestos Design Plan brings together all that together. I do not have a draft asbestos design plan at this time, but as soon as we have one, we're going to share it with the community. Land use restriction F is talking about compliance. Having a long-term maintenance cap on the site is definitely going to take some financial capital. So we want to make sure that the future owners have that long-term. So this land use restriction is making sure someone doesn't take it and can't maintain it. All right, we're halfway through. I hope the community's still with me. Land restriction G talks about new buildings. The current plan calls for adaptive reuse and no new structures, but I don't know what's going to happen in Davidson 5, 10, 50, or 100 years. When they do decide to put another building, we need to make sure all the parties are working together, that the asbestos designer and the engineers are putting a structure on something with a long-term cap. Land restriction H says that we will continue to have weekly inspections on the cap as we work through the environmental management plan, the asbestos design plan, and ultimately the redevelopment with adaptive reuse. But we want to make sure it's protective of human health and the environment all along the way. All right, there's a lot of text on this slide. Land restriction I, the environmental management plan, an EMP. This is a best practice on all our brownfield sites. It's for a developer, a contractor, future owners, and one document to know, is the soil impacted? Is the groundwater? Is there vapor issues? How am I going to handle it? Construction needs to move faster than government at times. So we want to identify, these are your potential issues, and this is where you'd want to handle it and how you'd want to move it forward. It doesn't cover everything, but it does help keep things moving forward. An environmental management plan will be publicly available once it's approved. All right, a lot's going on, as you can see, in brownfields, and we need to be updated. So we have a land use restriction that sends a summary redevelopment report. It needs to be sent at the end of redevelopment, which could be less than a year, or if your development is over multiple years, you'll need to send in a summary redevelopment report every year. Once again, just saying what you've done, if you exported soil, have you done sampling, a summary of your activities. All these documents will be publicly available when they're submitted. All right, there are a lot of land use restrictions about soil. This one in particular is saying how we want to be told before you're working in the soil, don't exceed the depths of the cap. You can cut it and, mow the lawn, cut the grass, do some pruning, but do it safely. Everything that you're doing needs to be in accordance with the asbestos design plan and the environmental management plan. This restriction follows more into play after it's been redeveloped and it's along the future. Speaking of soil, once they've developed it, they are required to do a final grade sampling. That means the soil that's exposed to you and I or the workers when you walk across it, we will have sampled it to say that there are no contaminants in it that exceed
I believe we have lost Carolyn. Everyone will just hold on a second. We'll see if she pops back in. I know there's some storms rolling through. Carolyn, are you able to connect? Everyone will just hang tight and be patient with us. We'll see what we can do for a technical workaround.
Laura, this is Bruce. I've just spoken to Carolyn. And can you hear me, Laura?
I can.
I've just spoken to Carolyn, and her computer just completely shut down. So she's going to have to she's not sure if it's overheating or just what, but I will just continue on if you don't mind.
I do not mind.
She's going to try to get back in, and when she does, she'll obviously make herself known.
If you'll give me about 2 minutes, I've got the presentation so I can get it
Yeah, I could just say next slide and we could go
Boot it
forward.
up. Yep. Just give me a minute. Thank you everyone for your patience. All right, Bruce, I've got the slide deck up. Can you remind me? I think we were on
You're on-
L and M.
Yeah, something around around that
Okay.
land use
And
restriction. L,
every-
I would say in that
okay.
range. You could start with that and see if it's the right one. If not, we can go back.
Okay. Ethan, if you can do some magic to give folks my screen, do I have to do that?
Yeah, you need to look for the share button on your machine and then share the presentation out. There you go.
Can everyone see that?
I can see it, Laura. So
Okay, we'll go
Yes,
with it.
and you're in the correct slide too.
very good. All right. Well, thank you for your patience, everyone. My name is Bruce Nicholson, and I'm the Brownfields Program Manager. And would just like to say that we are all very lucky to have Carolyn as the project manager on this particular project. Carolyn is the best of the best when it comes to being a project manager in brownfields, but I also say I've known a lot of state employees in my time with the state, and none finer than Carolyn Minnick. So let me continue on here, and hopefully Carolyn will be able to join us. As Carolyn was saying, these land use restrictions for these set forth the framework under which it can be redeveloped. It is a legal agreement, and these land use restrictions run with the land. So they pertain to the developer who is interested in redeveloping the property, but also should they sell the property in the future, the land use restrictions would continue to run in perpetuity, and so they do apply to any future owners on the property as well. So coming down to land use restriction L, it provides for a requirement for final grade sampling after all the development is done. We felt, and this is pretty standard on a lot of brownfield agreements, that is important to have sampling conducted of the soil to make sure that throughout all of the construction activities that may have been taking place on that site, none of them have compromised the public health protections in the surface soil, and that the surface soil, as the final grade, remains contaminant free. In this particular case, that meaning asbestos free. Then in M, there's a standard land use restriction that we use for making sure that soil can't be brought onto the property or removed from the property without prior sampling and analysis under a work plan that we approve. So that is a standard land use restriction that we use as well. Laura, next slide.
All right, I'm back. I don't know why my computer decided to stop. So
Well,
want to keep rolling with it, or do you want me to pick up?
please pick up, Carolyn. That is fine. I just continued on a little bit with one land use restriction, so go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what was up with my computer, but we will persevere on. At times I feel like this project makes us work harder. All right, land use restriction N. This is one of our standard land use restrictions. It's basically saying we don't want you to bring on, if you had a commingling, so you'd be able to know your old contamination from your new contamination. On this particular site, our main source is asbestos. So we are restricting building materials, and future would be no new asbestos containing materials on the property, but you can still have your cleaning fluids and along those lines, you know, generators on those, but nothing new. Don't want to bring existing ones on. All right, land use restriction O. This is in our best practices. All brownfields agreements in the last few years and moving forward will have a restriction about vapor. Vapor is not an issue on this particular property due to asbestos being in the ground for our existing structures, but in new structure, we would want to assess it. So this is our standard land use restriction, and it's best practices to have it in. All right, we are getting towards the end. I hope the audience is still with me and had a little bit of a laugh when I lost my computer. These are both standard land use restrictions, saying that a lot of times when a property is in brownfields, it's also in another DEQ program, but we're working with the prospective developers versus a responsible party. So if there is a well on your brownfields property and you go and destroy it, but it was put in by another program, you need to replace that well. And that's what this land use restriction says, that you are responsible to repair them, replace them. Once it's a standard one we put on. And the next one would be if DEQ wants to do additional assessment on your property or another party, you cannot deny them access. Be more applicable if you had a site with it that was within two different programs, but it's standard. We put it in all our agreements. All right.
Carolyn, let me just make that it clear that that is for the developer. The developer can't withhold access to their property for purposes of us investigating it. That's really what that's for.
Right, but and future owners, right?
Right, and future owners as well. So
yes,
we have a right to investigate that property and have access to it for that purpose.
All right, the next land use restriction is a standard one. We want to make sure that I know the people on this phone call know that there are restrictions on the property, the current people around here, but what about in 5, 10, 50, or 100 years? We need to make sure that it is always known there are land restrictions on it. So the deed must have the following statement that says it has a notice of brownfields property and where that can be found. And this is on all transactions that are recorded through the Register of Deeds. All right, the second most important land use restriction is the very last one. So the first one defined at our use was, the last one is called the land use restriction update, referred to as the LURU. The LURU is sent in once a year. It tells us who the current owners are on the property, if there were any transfer of ownership along the way, what is the status of that engineered cap, the soil caps, if it had any vapor mitigation along the way, if anyone had been renting it, maybe they'll be sending in their summary redevelopment report. It's summarizing everything throughout the year. And it lets us know that the restrictions are still there. The current owners know it. And so are the tenants moving forward. And a LURU is submitted once a year, and then it is posted on our Laserfiche documents. So this is an important one. And when you're looking for them, you can look for LURUs and whatever the project number is on our website. All right, we've gone through a lot of the nitty gritty. It's quite boring and cumbersome, but if you want to dive into every report that has to do with this property, or maybe really look through it in full detail, we have all the documents available online. There's two different ways to find it. There's the DWM site locator tool, or on Brownfields, we have our own that puts the boundaries on it. So in the toolbar, you'd want to put in 301 Depot Street or the project number. It would define the boundaries, a submenu would come up, and then you would click Brownfields documents, and then you get the picture on the right, and that is Laserfiche. The first one will say Davidson Depot PC documents, and you can look through it. Well, it might not be your first one, or all the reports that go through it. You'll notice there's two project numbers associated with this site because we ended up changing it midway through. The other way you can find the documents is they're available at the Davidson Library in hard copy. You can take a look at them, or you can look at them online. So where do we go now? Public comment starts on Tuesday, tomorrow. The Brownfield statute requires a 30-day public comment period. So I've presented this information to you. If you feel like you have new data or that we've missed some particular area or a land restriction needs to be strengthened, or just general feedback, that is over the next 30 days. Like I said, you can look at the documents online or in person. We're going to continue to do the weekly inspections on the Brownfields property, and we have many documents that still need to be finalized and approved, that asbestos design plan and that environmental management plan. All right, at this point, I am done talking about the Brownfield site portion. I am going to turn it over to Laura Leonard, and she can then regulate and go through questions.
Laura, if you're speaking, I think you're muted.
All right, well, maybe I transferred my technical issues to Laura. Oh, there we go. Right,
While
I
we're
don't see
waiting
any.
for Laura, let me just
don't see
also
go
talk a
ahead.
little bit about the Brownfields program and the real purpose behind it. One of the things that we get to do in this is talk about how we are protecting public health at this particular site for the community involved. And we really like to talk to communities through these public comments and public meetings so that you're aware of them. But brownfield agreements overall do support thousands upon thousands of jobs all across North Carolina. These sites are often sites that are abandoned. Well, they are abandoned, idled, or underutilized sites that would otherwise just sort of sit there and be idle and sit in a graveyard of unused sites. But with this program, we're able to work with the developer to give us the data that's necessary to make the site safe for the reuse that they propose. And the mechanism behind that is the Brownfield agreement that that Carolyn was just going over, including the land use restrictions, which provide the framework for the developer to be able to do certain things, but have restrictions, land use restrictions that protect public health. And so that is the basis for this particular event tonight, is to tell you about that Brownfield agreement that we have in draft form and have available for the public comment period.
So Bruce, Laura lost connection there, but we do have a question. We have a couple questions that have come in. Mr. Borax has asked, is there an estimate for the cost of all this work?
Well, the cost for the work is being borne by the prospective developer. So I can't tell you how much it is costing the developer, because all of the costs are being borne by the developer, including the costs to the state for the services of the Brownfields program. We charge a fee to the developer for that purpose. So everything we're asking the developer to do is coming at the expense and the cost of the developer. It's themselves. So they are interested in working with us to develop a Brownfield agreement, and they will bear all of the costs of this redevelopment.
All right.
Hope that answers your question. I'd be glad to answer any follow-ups.
I'm sure. We do have another question from Jane Campbell. It was noted that the cap currently in place is temporary. Can you describe the difference between this, the current one, the temporary cap, and what is defined as a permanent cap? A permanent cap for the site. What's the difference between the two?
I'm actually going to let Mark Miller address some of those since he's on the line. He is the developer. He could address the cost and then we'll talk about cap after.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Miller. I'm the prospective developer, as Carolyn noted. I think first I would say that our focus has been largely on the Brownfield agreement itself. That's been plenty of work for us over the last year, I would call it. I've been under contract on this property for almost 2.5 years now. And I think about a year and a half ago, we ran some cost estimates. And we were essentially coming to a cost of roughly $5 million just to redevelop the site and add that permanent cap. We typically see about $500,000 an acre or so just for usual standard site work. And when you introduced the permanent cap, it pretty much doubled that cost. So we're looking at roughly $1 million an acre. So that's a easy way to classify this. Now, of course, that was a year and a half ago. Costs have moved around, but that's where we were.
All right. Let's see. We have another question.
I was wondering if Miguel could address how we originally had the temporary cap because he worked with the current owner. And then the
Yeah,
long-term.
I can talk about the temporary cap. Can everybody hear me? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we can. Hey, Miguel, can you introduce yourself? I'm not sure everybody knows who you exactly are with in relationship to this project.
Hi, my name is Miguel Alvalle. I'm with the Superfund section, NCDQ. So I'm the current project manager from the inactive high size branch portion of the site. So basically, I'm handing this over to Carolyn as it goes into the Brownfields program. So, and I've been involved since the start with this project, as well as that other Davidson project that we've been working on. So when it comes to the temporary cap was meant to mitigate the immediate risk that had happened back when the asbestos was discovered. So we designed a temporary cap to quickly be able to mitigate the risk that erosion was taking place was posing. So we designed a cap for about temporary cap was meant to be for about 3 years, and it's been holding up, and we've been doing repairs to it as we do any of the inspections, and if there's any issues, we've been repairing those. So that's why we do weekly inspections, and that has taken care of most of the issues that has arisen, and it has helped very well. Now, when it comes to a permanent cap, well, what's going to be a permanent cap is going to be similar to what they do with landfills. So it's going to be some more robust cap that was going to put in place that's going to last, 50, 100 years, 200 years. So that's where a more robust cap with your geotextile type materials are used in regular landfills when they abandon landfills. That's what we're looking for as a permanent cap, and then also the parking lot, etc., all the other stuff that's going to be put on top of that will also hold everything in place and provide a protective barrier for the future.
All right, thank you, Miguel. We do have another question here from Barbara Randolph. She says that she's not clear how the potential release of airborne asbestos is prevented if the property is developed. She said she observed many clauses related to containment related to the soil, but Airborne was not necessarily apparent to her, and how that may be handled on this property.
So this is Jeff Dillinger. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So I work for the asbestos program, and part of the development requirements before anyone, as we call it, digs in the dirt, there will be a written specification or a plan how to do this safely using the right people, the right work practices, and a lot of air monitoring, both on the individuals disturbing any dirt and perimeter air sampling to ensure there's no migration or airborne concentration of asbestos fibers in the air. And that a lot of people are trained and experienced in this. So it'll be a contractor that obviously is experience in knowing how to do this and using the best work practices with the air monitoring to confirm that these work practices indeed have no fiber release outside the immediate work zone.
Thank you, Jeff. We did have one more question from Dora DuBose. Her question was, is this a project one of the first of its kind? And if it isn't, can you provide more information about other projects of this nature and what the outcomes were for those projects?
Well, this is Bruce Nicholson. Let me just come in here too and say that the capping of asbestos or having an asbestos type landfill is not new. It's a certainly is a technology for making an engineered cap for asbestos containing materials is something that is fairly well-known science and is something that is a state-of-the-art practice. As a brownfield site, we have one other site that was not a landfill per se, but for which we did put a asbestos cap on a site, but nothing as elaborate as this one, which is actually a asbestos landfill. So in the brownfields context, this is a unique project in the construct of knowing what to do with asbestos and asbestos capping. It is not new, and that's a technology that is well understood.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Bruce said, we'll be using certified asbestos designers. There's an entire federal, state, local program that works around asbestos. So we know how to, we'll have the right people in the right places. That's why Jeff has been with us with the Department of Human Health and Services and with Asbestos Group since we've started in 2015. So we will be following best practices. And I think we can do it safely like they did in the existing neighborhood yards.
All right. So we have another question that has come in. And I'm not sure if you all can see this in the chat, but it says there was a reference to a requirement that there will be a provision to allow EPA to have future access to monitoring wells on the site. Can you clarify whether any monitoring wells are currently anticipated for this site to address the asbestos contamination issue? And that question came from Jeff Merrifield.
Yeah, no, there are no monitoring wells on this site. It would be in the future if they wanted to, you'd have to protect them, but there are none on it right now.
And nor would there be if we're looking for asbestos. It really is an airborne contaminant, and it's not something we'd be looking for in a monitoring well context.
And this is Laura. I have been able to reconnect. Do we have any other further questions? Feel free to put them in the chat box and we will address them tonight.
Or Laura, if there's any follow-ups to other questions that we've asked, we'd be glad to ask, if somebody has any further questions.
Agree, Bruce. One just popped in. Is there a developer that has a specific plan?
Hey, it's Mark Miller. Carolyn mentioned this, but our plan all along has been for an adaptive reuse project. I think that that's in line with what the town would like to see. It's also a much more minimal development plan as far as how invasive you're going to be with the site. I think there was a developer a few years ago that was proposing a fairly large multifamily development, which was requiring a good bit of excavation into this site. So that wasn't really, fortunately, not in the town's interest, but also just a higher risk of development considering this site. So for us, we're just planning to renovate the buildings, put in parking, put in the permanent cap, and that is our plan.
And this is Bruce. Let me just also say that Carolyn has been to other previous meetings and heard the community's message loud and clear that they really were not interested in having a residential large complex that took the buildings that are on the site down. And so this adaptive reuse of the current structures that are on the site is something that we are hoping is much more in line with what we have heard from previous meetings that the community is very interested in. So, credit Carolyn to bringing that issue to our attention and making sure that we're proceeding according to what the wishes of the community were at that time.
I see we've gotten a few more comments on the chat. I'm going to try to address them, and others in the panel can jump in if they want to.
The first one is, looks like the next steps are getting the ADP and EMP. What's the time frame for getting those done and approved? Carolyn and Bruce?
Sure, certainly. So first, we need to finish the Brownfield process and get the recorded, and then the prospective developers plans to purchase the property. So once he purchases the property, then we'll be getting those agreements. I don't have a timeline of what they are, but I do know that it doesn't mean that the community will remain safe for public health and the environment, because we are inspecting the cap weekly, and whether it's the current owner or a new owner, that will continue to move forward. So I don't know if Mark has a timeline for that, but even if they don't, we're going to make sure that we have measures in place to ensure that it's no longer a risk in the community. And when we're redeveloping it, they will be doing probably air monitoring, similar that they did when we did the slope stabilization through the IHSB group, to ensure that anything doesn't go beyond the property.
The land use restrictions are written in such a way so as to say no use may be made of the property until we receive the asbestos development plan. So in other words, it prevents development until such time that we get that.
Yeah, but they can continue to.
Oh, absolutely. In
maintain
other
it,
words,
yeah.
they can continue to use it under the current temporary cap. But I'm talking about redeveloping the property, and no redevelopment activities can take place until then.
Thank you, Bruce and Carolyn. Another question that came in is from Jane Campbell, who says that sharing a question from someone who couldn't get on the WebEx. Will there be any threats to immediate neighbors during the construction/mitigation work?
No, we'll make sure the asbestos design plan and we work with it, though we don't want to create a new threat. So that's why we have an asbestos designer and Jeff working with us and the developer.
Yes, ensuring that those practices are such that the asbestos fibers aren't going to escape the site. And we will have air monitoring data to show that. That'll be all part of the asbestos development plan.
And this question goes along with that one. How will they, if it's affecting the public, how will they relocate as was done when work was done on private residences?
There are not plans in the work to relocate citizens.
All right. Our next question is, what is the timeline for the development? I am assuming that it is a certainty, or is the development still in question? I believe you spoke to this a few minutes ago, Carolyn.
Right, so the Brownfields agreement doesn't have a timeline set in place to go through it. It's an intention that they desire to redevelop it. Obviously, we've shown that they're financially capable to move forward with it. Mark and his group want to do it. We will be continuing to inspect it weekly to ensure that there's no new releases and that the existing cap is doing well.
And as to timeline, that's a question for Mark, and I don't know if he wants to add anything more than that. He may have his own internal timeline for this project.
Sure, I can speak to that. I mean, Carolyn's right. The goal right now is to complete the Brownfield agreement and purchase the property. And after that, we will pick back up on working on the asbestos design plan and the environmental management plan. And I mentioned this when David Borix did a good radio series interview. It's going to take time. I mean, this is not something that we're going to rush. And so it's a complicated site. The priority is safety. And so there is nothing on our end that is forcing our hand to do this quickly, and not without getting into details. There's no equity source that's pushing on us to develop this and sell it as quickly as possible. We really don't have plans to sell it. We'll see how that goes, but we're looking at this as a long-term ownership. So we want to be good neighbors. But the point of that is that we're going to work through this meticulously, and we're not going to let it sit, but we are going to take our time to work through that. And then when those plans are put together and agreed upon with DEQ, then they'll be shared with the community.
Thank you. There's another question for you, Mark. Is that roughly the same plan schematic that you shared at a meeting a while back?
It could be. That was before pandemic. There's been, lots of changes with how space is used from a retail and office perspective, and retail and offices are the planned uses for the adaptive reuse project. I think it will be in that same vein. Yes, there could be changes, between now and actually doing the project.
I wanted to address the comment for public comments. You can email me, you can call me, this presentation will be available on the website, and I'm sure the town will post it too. So if you want to send in public comments, any type of media, written, email, text, phone, I can go to myself.
Okay, and we can provide your email address. Or actually, it was on the next to last slide, I believe. I believe there's also a question that says, so you have parameters that meld development with safety. It is important the public is aware of those parameters.
Absolutely. This is not our last public meeting information. I'm sure we will be sharing other things with you along the way. I hope to meet in person. It's a little easier to talk.
Okay, the next question says, not sure if I am clear on vendorship. What is the vendorship status with networking, collaboration with community relations? As I understood, the community involvement and interest is high priority. That's from Mr. Bose.
I'm going to pass that one to Mark. And I guess they do want community involvement.
Yeah, I'm reading the question here. Of course, we would like community involvement. I assume that we're talking about the design or, you know, the function of green space. I'm not super clear on the question there, but we always want, I can say this, I mean, definitively, we want the project to fit in the neighborhood. We don't want something that feels like it was, you know, meant to be in New York or something. This needs to be something that fits in Davidson and the surrounding area. That we rely on community input to get that right.
And I think we might need to clarify Carolyn's about the need for relocation, and just give a little more detail about why it's not needed in this instance.
I really think it's a bit premature. I don't know. I haven't seen the asbestos design plan. I haven't seen the environmental management plan. It wasn't what was on the table to begin with, but this is really just the infrastructure to make sure it is safe for human health and protective of the environment. So if when we come through here and we review it with the different agencies and they're like, you need to relocate the people, we will work that in. But right now, it's just the infrastructure of what is in the asbestos design plan and how we have the land use restrictions, but we don't have that level of detail yet.
I believe that helps, Carolyn, to know that it would be addressed in the asbestos design plan once we get that, if that's needed.
But I want to also say that we don't anticipate there being any need for relocation. But obviously, we'll wait and see what the asbestos design plan looks like. But I do believe with the practices that will be in the asbestos design plan for the construction, that relocation really will not be needed. But then again, we'll be looking to the asbestos design plan for that answer.
I'm trying video again. Are there any more questions from any of our attendees? If so, again, please put them in the chat and we'll be able to address them tonight. Otherwise, you can definitely email Carolyn. Her email address is in the chat. It's also on I believe the last slide, if not to the next last slide of the presentation. We'll just give it a few more minutes and see if anyone has any further questions. And one came in. The question is all the asbestos on the site located in the covered pit?
No, but all asbestos is covered. So it is not all in that green area. There is asbestos in other portions of the property, but there is no exposure at this time that we are aware of. We inspect it weekly, we fix things as they come up, and we feel that it's safe for the community.
And Carolyn, this is Jeff. I would like to agree also with what you just said. I have not seen any exposed asbestos in the area, but I do know that things are covered up either in dirt or asphalt or some concrete or something.
This is true, and also I will say that there is a land use restriction for which there will be post-development sampling. With everything is done, and we know that the cap is in place and the development is finished, there will be post-development sampling to make sure that there's nothing else on the surface at all. So that's also a land use restriction to make sure that once this is all said and done, we have the data that shows that there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Now, let me just also say that this is all relative to, as Carolyn was saying, the donut hole in the center, right? There may yet exist some asbestos off the property related to the donut, which Miguel and the Inactive Hazardous Sites Program is continuing to work on with the EPA, who has conducted removal actions for that material in the past. So that is a ancillary part of this project as well, making sure that the public is aware and that those areas of asbestos have been addressed through the EPA removal action, and then that there's stewardship of those should any further ones be discovered in the future. But again, though that is off the main property.
A question has come in. In past years, the community had meetings with the potential vendors. Is the vendor open to meeting with the community soon?
Sure, we're happy to meet with the vendor, the community. Sorry, again, this is Mark Miller talking. I think our focus after coming into ownership is on that asbestos design plan and the environmental management plan. So again, if you're talking about the design, like the facade, the architecture, the function, the uses that are going in there, we would love to have that feedback. I would say that would come at a later date. I think the complicated part of this project is getting the construction plan put together that, again, develops this site in a safe way. That's the priority. So it could be a while before we get to the part that's, where we're putting retail, where we're putting office, where all that green space comes into play, and parking, and so on and so on. So I hope I'm answering your question, but let me know if I'm not.
Laura, may I speak?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. This is Jamie Justice, Town Manager for the town of Davidson. And I did want to say a few things really quickly. I want to thank the environmental experts that are here helping us in our community with US EPA and the state's Department of Environmental Quality. Having you all and your expertise here to help our community deal with the asbestos issue, town is very appreciative and supportive of your agency's work. And so we want to thank you for all you have been doing and will continue to do to help address this long-standing environmental concern in our community. So thank you for that. I do also want to say that from the standpoint of the town and this particular site, this temporary solution obviously is not going to last forever, and a permanent solution is what we all want to see happen so that we can protect the health and safety of our community. And so through this Brownfields agreement and working with the developer here, this permanent solution is really what we need to address the environmental concern. And that's something that we have been working with you all on and are happy that we're heading in this direction. Doing nothing at this site is just simply not an option. And so having this brownfields agreement to where we feel like the environmental concern will be addressed to protect the health and safety of our community and is the right thing to do. So we are looking forward to continuing to work with all the environmental agencies and the developer to see the brownfields agreement go through, and for the adaptive use, saving those buildings and having that adaptive use project go through the town's planning process. So there will be more opportunities for citizen feedback on what is proposed for the redevelopment of that site. So just know that that opportunity will be coming as well. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I just wanted to make that known.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. Let's see. Another comment in our chat. Sadly, is first and foremost, yes, all phases of the progress is vital according to the planning process. We look forward to collaboration. Is there a contact number for the vendor?
Hey, it's Mark. I will put my information in the chat. Hopefully I do this right where everyone can see it, but it's also Mark Miller, and I work at Lapp Purser and Associates, which is a development firm in Charlotte, and my information's on that website as well. So I'll put my number and email, and I'm happy to answer any further questions after this meeting as well.
You can also reach out to me as the information that comes to it's publicly available, who the prospective developer contact is. So Mark has given that information in the Brownfields property application, so I can share it.
Thank you, Mark and Carolyn. Do we have any more questions? There we go. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, on behalf of DEQ, the Brownfields Program, Superfund staff, as well as others in this meeting, the Town of Davidson, DHHS, and Mr. Miller, our prospective developer, we would like to thank you for coming out tonight, for joining our virtual information meeting. Carolyn has provided her contact information in the chat, as well as Mr. Miller, and we will get the presentation posted as quickly as possible, probably tomorrow, the next day. We've got some website stuff going on in DEQ, so we're hoping sooner rather than later we'll be good to go. Let's see. So if you have further comments after reading through the draft Brownfields agreement, I think it's called a draft Brownfields agreement, please feel free to reach out to any member on this team. Carolyn is our point person for Brownfields. Again, the materials can be found online, or they can be found in the library. And DEQ also has a web page on this project on the Davidson Asbestos site. All that information is in the presentation, and we'll provide it as soon as we can. Thank you all, and have a great night.
Laura, one other question that I just want to mention, and that is this opens the 30-day public comment period, official 30-day public comment period on this project. Although the documents have been available and open for public comment at the library for a while now, but the 30-day public comment period will start as of this meeting.
That is correct. That begins tomorrow morning. Someone posted in the chat a last minute question. When will there be a discussion about the donut, and who is leading that conversation? And for that, I will turn to Jim Bateson and Miguel, who can further discuss the donut side of our donut hole situation.
Hi, this is Jim Bateson, and I think as many residents have seen that during the the times when EPA was in town in 2017 and 2021. And in the years in between, the town of Davidson, our agency, DEQ, the Department of Health and Human Services, Mecklenburg County Environmental Health, Mecklenburg County Air Quality, Charlotte Water, DOT. All these agencies have been active partners and many doing active work mitigating risks and working side by side with EPA and identifying and managing the asbestos risks. EPA Superfund, of course, is wrapping up its work in the residential property surrounding the mill site. They plan to release their final report on the asbestos sampling and removal that they've done in 2021 later this month. Once that report is released, all of those partner agencies will then convene and plan the best way forward to ensure all agencies' continued active involvement to protect residents going forward in those surrounding residential properties. And we will make a commitment always to continue consulting with community leaders when designing this plan. It's too early to go into detail now about the role that all these agencies will play and the approach that we'll take in informing and protecting people. But we're going to go up after it hammer and tongs, starting in November.
Thank you, Jim. There goes my video. Thank you for that. Okay, I see no more further questions. Again, everyone, thank you for coming out tonight. If you have questions once you log off and you get through the materials, feel free to reach out to Carolyn, myself, or anyone else with our on this team, with the DEQ team, and we'll be happy to get you the information or put you in touch with the right folks that can get you the information. So I will sign off and say have a great night and a good week.